"No man wants me," said the Apache girl. A lonely rancher took her in, unaware of her secret. The sun hung low over the wide fields of the ranch, painting everything in a golden glow. The air smelled faintly of hay and dust, and the soft hum of insects mixed with the distant calls of cattle. The rancher, a tall man with hands hardened from years of work, moved slowly among the livestock. His face was calm, but carried the faint weight of loneliness, as though the quiet of the ranch had settled into his bones. He had lived alone here for years, with only the animals for company, and though he took pride in his work, there were moments when the silence pressed on him like a heavy blanket. That evening, as he led a group of cows back to their pen, he noticed movement along the edge of the property. A figure emerged from the dusty trail that bordered the field, hesitant and slow. The rancher paused, shielding his eyes against the setting sun, and squinted to see more clearly. The figure was small, wrapped in a thin shawl, her hair dark and untidy, her footsteps careful but unsteady. Something about her presence stirred a mixture of curiosity and caution in him. She stopped a few meters from the fence, lowering her gaze to the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and trembling, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "No man wants me," she said. The words floated across the air, fragile but filled with a kind of pain that made the rancher's chest tighten. He didn't understand everything about her, but he understood enough. She was alone, and she was hurt. The rancher hesitated, unsure how to respond. He was used to handling animals and machinery, not people who carried invisible burdens in their hearts. But something about the girl, the quiet sorrow in her eyes, reached a part of him that he rarely allowed anyone to see. Without thinking too much, he opened the gate and gestured toward the house. "You can come in. Rest. Eat something." The girl blinked, her dark eyes flicking up to meet his. She seemed startled, as though she hadn't expected kindness. She took a cautious step forward, her hands gripping the shawl around her shoulders. I shouldn't," she murmured. Her voice held a hint of fear, a hesitation that spoke of a life filled with rejection and caution. "You look like you could use some food," the rancher said gently. "No one will hurt you here." After a long pause, the girl nodded slightly. She followed him slowly, keeping her gaze on the ground. Each step seemed deliberate, as if she were measuring the safety of the space between herself and the man who had offered shelter. The rancher led her through the large wooden door of his home, the smell of cooked bread and fresh milk greeting her senses. It was simple, warm, and quiet, with sunlight streaming through the windows and dust motes dancing in the beams. He motioned toward a chair by the kitchen table. "Sit. I'll bring you some food." The girl hesitated, then lowered herself carefully into the seat. Her hands were small, and her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. She seemed both grateful and wary, as though she had been taught to expect the worst from every stranger. The rancher moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, bread, cheese, and a mug of warm milk. He set it before her, and she looked at it almost suspiciously, then finally picked up the bread and took a small bite. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, filled with a cautious curiosity. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Everyone needs a place to rest sometimes." His voice was calm, steady, carrying no judgment. He had learned a long time ago that people often carried stories they didn't share, and sometimes the best thing he could do was listen with his presence, not his words. The girl ate slowly, as though afraid the food might disappear. The rancher watched her quietly, noting how tense her shoulders were, how her eyes darted to every sound. He could tell she had lived a life that had taught her caution more than comfort. After a while, she finished the bread and set the plate aside. She didn't speak for a long moment, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. The rancher felt a strange sense of connection, a pull he hadn't felt in years. He had always been comfortable in solitude, but her presence, fragile as it was, made the quiet feel less heavy, more alive. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no bitterness in it, only honesty and a touch of fear. Everyone leaves me." The rancher nodded slowly. "Then you'll stay here for now. No one will make you leave." He spoke with a certainty that seemed to surprise her. Perhaps no one had ever spoken to her like that before, without judgment or expectation. She looked up at him then, a flicker of something, relief perhaps, or disbelief, in her dark eyes. "Really?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "You can stay as long as you need. Just take it one day at a time." The girl's shoulders relaxed slightly. She leaned back in the chair and let out a quiet sigh, almost like a small release of the tension she had been carrying for so long. The rancher returned to his work, giving her space, understanding that trust couldn't be rushed. As the evening deepened, the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the first stars appearing like tiny sparks against the darkening sky. The girl ventured to the porch, looking out at the wide fields and the slow movement of the cattle. She had never been in a place like this before, open, quiet, and safe. For a moment, the burden on her shoulders felt a little lighter. The rancher joined her quietly, leaning against the railing. He didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch between them, comfortable in its own way. Finally, he said, "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to. Just know that this place is yours too if you want it." The girl looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time there was no fear in her eyes, only a tentative curiosity. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and caution, as though she wanted to believe him but wasn't sure if she could. Thank you," she said again, this time with a small, genuine smile. Night fell slowly over the ranch, the soft sounds of animals settling into the dark filling the air. The girl curled up in a small bed the rancher had prepared for her in a spare room. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the life she had left behind, the people who had turned away, and the stranger who had opened his home without question. Something inside her felt like it could change. Slowly, if she allowed herself. The rancher moved around the house, checking on the animals and locking doors. He paused for a moment at the doorway to her room, glancing in to see her finally drifting into sleep. A quiet thought crossed his mind, a sense that this encounter, however brief or long it would last, had already shifted something inside both of them. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of a new day. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, there was a fragile sense of hope. The rancher had taken in a stranger, a girl with a secret and a broken heart, and the girl had found a place that might just be safe enough to let her guard down. In that quiet moment, the rancher didn't ask questions he wasn't ready to hear. The girl didn't reveal the secret she had carried for so long. And yet, without words, a bond began to form. A bond of trust, of safety, and of the unspoken understanding that sometimes just being there for someone was enough to begin healing. The night deepened, and the ranch rested under the starry sky, carrying the quiet weight of beginnings. The Apache girl slept, dreaming lightly of fields and skies, while the rancher stayed awake a little longer, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch he had tended for years, now filled with the quiet presence of a life that had unexpectedly walked into it. No one spoke of the past or the troubles that might come. For now it was enough that they were both there, in the same place, sharing a moment of calm, fragile as it might be, and in that shared silence both felt the stirrings of something new. Trust, curiosity, and the unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, the future could be different. The next morning, the ranch woke with the soft light of dawn spilling over the hills. Birds chirped in the trees, and the low hum of cattle filled the air. The Apache girl stirred in her small bed, blinking at the gentle sunlight that streamed through the window. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she had rarely allowed herself to feel. Safety. The world outside might still be harsh, full of people who would not understand her, but here, in this quiet house surrounded by fields and animals, she could breathe. She slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake the rancher. He had been up early, as usual, tending to the animals and preparing for the day's chores. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted from the kitchen, and her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had not eaten much yesterday. She padded down the hallway, and there he was, leaning over the trough, brushing the coat of a brown horse with gentle practiced strokes. His presence was steady, calm, and quietly reassuring, like the rhythm of the ranch itself. "Good morning," he said without turning, his voice even and warm. "Sleep well?" "Yes," she said softly, a little shyly. "Thank you for letting me stay." "You're welcome," he replied, finally looking up with a small smile. "Breakfast is ready. Come eat before the work starts." She nodded and followed him into the kitchen. The table was simple but inviting. Warm bread, fresh fruit, and a mug of milk waiting for her. She sat down carefully, feeling slightly awkward in the quiet routine of the morning. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with this kind of simple kindness that she almost didn't know how to react. The rancher poured himself a cup of coffee and sat opposite her. They ate in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the ranch outside filling the room. Slowly, the girl began to relax. She noticed the careful way he moved, how he treated every animal and every object with attention and care. She found herself wondering how someone could live alone in such a large place and yet feel content. After breakfast, the rancher handed her a small bucket. "We need to feed the chickens," he said. "It's simple work, but it helps pass the time and keeps your mind busy." At first she moved slowly, unsure of herself. She had never worked on a ranch before, and the routines of caring for animals were unfamiliar. But the rancher guided her gently, showing her how to scatter the feed and check the water troughs. There was no impatience in his voice, no judgment for mistakes, only calm instruction and encouragement. As the morning passed, the girl began to feel a strange sense of accomplishment. The animals, though unresponsive in words, gave her quiet feedback with their movements, the chickens clucking as they pecked at the feed, the cows looking up with curious eyes. She started to understand that small acts of care could create trust, even with creatures who could not speak. By mid-morning, the rancher suggested they work on repairing a broken fence along the edge of the property. The girl hesitated at first, looking at the tall wooden posts and the heavy tools, but he smiled reassuringly. "We'll do it together," he said. "You don't have to know everything right away." The work was hard at first. Her hands ached from gripping the tools, and she worried that she would break something or make a mistake. But the rancher guided her step by step, showing her how to lift the posts, hammer the nails, and align the boards. Slowly she began to gain confidence, and by the end of the morning they had repaired several sections of the fence. "Not bad for your first day," the rancher said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're learning quickly." Compliments were rare in her life, and she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't know I could do this." "You can do a lot more than you realize," he replied. There was a quiet honesty in his voice, a belief that seemed to make her believe in herself a little more with each word. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the girl began to notice small details about the ranch that she hadn't seen before. The way the wind moved through the tall grass, the way the cattle recognized the rancher's voice, the quiet harmony of life when it was respected and cared for. It was peaceful, but it was also alive, full of small lessons that she had never learned in her previous life. Over the next few days, she settled into a routine. She helped feed the animals, tended to the garden, and learned the rhythms of life on the ranch. The rancher never pushed her to speak about her past, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. Yet, slowly, small conversations began to form between them. She learned about his life, his work, and the loneliness that had settled over him after years of living alone. In turn, he began to notice her small habits, the careful way she cleaned the stables, the way she watched the animals, and the quiet strength that lay beneath her shy exterior. Despite the growing trust, there were moments of tension. Sometimes the girl would disappear for hours into the fields, returning with a faraway look in her eyes. Other times she would flinch at sudden movements or refuse to speak when asked about herself. The rancher didn't push her, but he noticed. He realized she was carrying a secret, something heavy enough to make her cautious, even around someone who only wanted to help. One evening, as the sky turned a soft pink and the sun dipped behind the hills, the girl sat on the porch staring out at the fields. The rancher joined her quietly, leaning against the railing. "You've been quiet today," he said softly. "I just like watching," she replied, her voice hesitant. "It's peaceful." "It is peaceful," he agreed. "Sometimes it's good to just watch and breathe. You don't always have to talk." She nodded, looking down at her hands. The rancher watched her for a moment, sensing the weight she carried, though he didn't know what it was. "You know," he said carefully, "you don't have to hide everything. Not here." She glanced at him, her dark eyes flicking with uncertainty. I can't tell everything," she whispered. "Not yet." "That's okay," he said. "One day when you're ready, you can. Until then, you're safe here. That's what matters." The girl nodded again, a small sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of trust. The rancher had not demanded her story, had not judged her for being alone or for her past. He had only offered a space to be herself, however cautious or fragile that might be. As the days turned into a week, the girl grew more comfortable with her new life. She laughed softly at the rancher's jokes, helped him with chores without being asked, and began to notice the small joys of ranch life. The way the sunlight glinted on the morning dew, the soft cooing of doves in the trees, and the rhythmic sound of hooves against the ground. She hid letters in her room, folded carefully in her bag, and sometimes took long walks to the edge of the property, staring at the horizon as though searching for something she could not name. The rancher noticed these moments but never pressed. He knew that some truths could only be revealed in their own time. One afternoon as they worked together in the garden, the rancher asked, "Do you like it here?" She paused, holding a small trowel in her hands. I like it," she said quietly. "It's different. Safe." "That's good," he said, smiling. "You deserve a place like this." She looked at him then, a faint shadow of emotion passing over her face. Gratitude, perhaps, or the first spark of hope that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she said softly. The rancher nodded, returning to his work, giving her the space to feel what she needed to feel. He had learned that patience and quiet presence often mattered more than words, and he hoped that, in time, she would feel comfortable enough to share her story. That night, the girl sat by the fire, listening to the crackling of the flames. She thought about her past, the pain, the loneliness, and the sense of being unwanted. But here, on this quiet ranch, she began to feel something different, the possibility of belonging, of trust, and of connection. The rancher had not only given her shelter, but also the gentle reminder that kindness existed, even in a world that had often been unkind to her. And though she did not yet reveal her secret, she knew she was beginning a journey she had never dared to start before. A journey of trust, healing, and perhaps, one day, love. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the dark sky, reflecting the quiet hope that had taken root in the girl's heart. The rancher checked the animals one last time before heading to bed, satisfied with the day's work. He paused at the doorway to her room, seeing her curled up and reading by the firelight. A quiet thought crossed his mind. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change a life forever. The night passed gently over the ranch, carrying with it the fragile promise of new beginnings. The Apache girl slept peacefully for the first time in many nights, unaware of the challenges the future might hold, but comforted by the knowledge that she was no longer alone. And the rancher, too, felt a quiet shift in his life, sensing that the arrival of this shy, lonely girl had already begun to transform the emptiness that had long filled his days. The morning air was cool as the rancher and the Apache girl stepped outside. Mist still clung to the fields, curling around the legs of the cattle as they grazed. The rancher had begun to notice a change in her, small but noticeable. She moved more confidently, laughed softly at the occasional joke, and even seemed to enjoy the routines of the ranch. Yet, despite these signs of comfort, there remained moments when her eyes darkened, and her movements became careful, almost fearful, as if some invisible weight still clung to her. That day, as they worked side by side repairing a small barn door, the girl's hands trembled slightly while holding the hammer. The rancher noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked gently. She paused, looking away, her lips pressed together. I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice betrayed her, a faint quiver hiding under the assurance. The rancher didn't push. He had learned that patience and observation often revealed more than direct questions. By late morning, the sun had risen high, burning away the mist, and they took a break near the shade of an old oak tree. The rancher handed her a cool drink of water, and she took it gratefully. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the rustling leaves and the soft lowing of cows. "Do you, have family?" he asked gently, not wanting to startle her, yet sensing the question lingered in the air between them. The girl's eyes flicked to the ground. She twisted her fingers together nervously, her lips tightening. I had, she said slowly. But they aren't really around anymore. The rancher nodded slowly, giving her space. "That's hard," he said quietly. "I understand losing people you care about, or feeling like no one's there for you." Her eyes met his briefly, a flicker of emotion passing over her face. I'm used to being on my own," she said softly. "Most people, they just walk away when things get hard." He reached out, just slightly, resting a hand lightly on the bench between them. "Not everyone is like that," he said. "Some people stay. Some people try to understand." For a moment she looked at him, as if testing the truth of his words. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of disappointment, of being unwanted again, made her hesitate. Still, a small spark of trust began to grow. Later that afternoon, a sudden sound from the far field startled the girl. She froze, her hands gripping a wooden post tightly. The rancher noticed immediately and walked over. "It's just the wind," he said, though he kept his voice calm, watching her closely. "Or maybe one of the animals wandering. Nothing to worry about." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but only after a long pause. "I'm just careful, she whispered, almost apologetically. I know, he said, and that's okay. Everyone has their reasons. You don't have to explain it if you're not ready. The afternoon wore on, and they returned to the house as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The girl moved about quietly, helping with small chores, washing dishes, tidying up the porch, and setting food for the evening meal. The rancher watched her carefully, sensing that today might be the day when her secret, the one she had carried so carefully, would begin to surface. That evening, while preparing dinner, the girl's attention was drawn to a small envelope hidden under her shawl. She had carried it everywhere, clutching it tightly, refusing to let anyone see. The rancher noticed her sudden stiffness, but didn't comment. He knew that whatever was inside the envelope was important, perhaps even painful, and that she would share it in her own time. As they sat down to eat, a gentle knock sounded at the door. The girl froze, her eyes widening. The rancher stood slowly and opened the door to reveal a middle-aged woman with a worried expression. She glanced at the girl and then at the rancher. I'm looking for her, the woman said hesitantly. The girl's face paled, and she shrank back slightly. No, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rancher stepped forward, placing himself subtly between the visitor and the girl. Who are you looking for? He asked firmly, his tone calm but protective. I'm a relative, the woman said quickly. I just need to talk. The girl's hands clutched the envelope even tighter. I can't, she said, her voice trembling. Please. He didn't know all the details, but he could see the fear in her eyes, the panic that this encounter had stirred. She's safe here, he said firmly. If there's something important, we'll handle it, but right now, she doesn't want to leave. The woman hesitated, sensing the rancher's unwavering stance, and finally stepped back, giving a small nod. I just wanted to make sure she's okay, she said softly, before turning to leave. The girl exhaled slowly, her body sagging with relief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. She had feared exposure, feared being dragged back into a world where she had no control, and yet the rancher had stood for her without question. That night, after the visitor had left, the girl sat by the fire, the envelope resting on her lap. She had carried it for months, ever since the event that had changed her life. Inside were letters, documents, and photographs that she had hidden from everyone, reminders of a past that had made her feel unwanted and alone. For the first time, she considered sharing them with someone she trusted. The rancher noticed her somber expression but didn't press. Instead, he sat across the room, quietly tending to the fire. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice hesitant but determined. I need to tell you something, she said. He leaned forward slightly, encouraging her without words. I'm listening, he said softly. She took a deep breath and opened the envelope, showing him the letters and photographs. I've been on my own for a long time, she began. I had people, but they didn't care. They left me, or I had to leave them. I'd had to take care of things alone, things no one else could understand. The rancher studied the papers carefully, understanding that the weight she carried was heavy. You didn't have to face that alone, he said gently. But you did, and that shows strength, not weakness. I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid that if anyone knew, they would leave too, or that I'd be unwanted. You're not unwanted, he said firmly. Not here. Not with me. You're safe now. That's all that matters. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire casting warm light across the room. The girl felt a weight lifting, the first hint of relief since she had arrived at the ranch. She realized that secrets, while heavy, could be shared when trust existed, and for the first time she truly felt that trust with the rancher. Over the next few days, the rancher and the girl worked together to address some of the challenges her secret had created. They sorted through papers, made plans, and prepared for any obstacles that might arise. The process was slow, careful, and respectful. The rancher never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give, and the girl, in turn, began to see the ranch as a place where she could belong, not just physically, but emotionally. The bond between them deepened in ways that went beyond words. She began to laugh more freely, help more confidently, and even speak openly about her hopes and fears. And the rancher, too, found a sense of companionship he hadn't realized he needed. He had always been content in his solitude, but her presence had awakened a part of him that had been dormant for years, the part that wanted connection, trust, and shared responsibility. By the end of the week, the girl had revealed most of her secret to the rancher. Though there were still things she kept to herself, the burden she had carried for so long had been eased. And the rancher, having witnessed her courage and resilience, knew that she was not defined by the past, but by the choices she made each day, by the strength she showed in facing life head-on. As the sun set one evening, casting a golden glow across the fields, they stood together on the porch, watching the animals settle down for the night. The girl leaned slightly on the railing, a small, contented smile on her face. I think I can stay here," she said quietly. "You can stay as long as you want," the rancher replied. "You don't have to worry about anything else." And in that moment, they both knew that life on the ranch would never be the same. Challenges would come, and the past would continue to whisper in quiet moments. But they had each other now. And that, they realized, was enough to face whatever the future might hold. The days after the girl shared her secret felt calmer, almost lighter. It was not that her problems had suddenly disappeared. Life rarely worked that way. But something important had changed inside her. The heavy silence she once carried was no longer there. She no longer felt like she had to hide every thought or emotion, and that made a difference she could feel in small, quiet ways. The rancher noticed it too. She walked with more confidence now. Her shoulders were no longer always tense. Sometimes she even hummed softly while working, a gentle sound that blended with the wind moving across the fields. It made the ranch feel warmer, less empty than it had been before she arrived. One morning they worked together fixing an old shed behind the barn. The wood had begun to weaken with time, and the roof needed repair before the rainy season came. The work was slow but steady. The rancher handled the heavier parts, while she measured boards, held tools, and kept things organized. At one point she wiped her hands on her jeans and looked around the land, stretching far into the distance. "I never thought I would feel peaceful somewhere like this," she said quietly. The rancher leaned against a wooden beam. "Peace doesn't come from the place," he replied. "It comes from feeling safe." Sometimes all a person needs is one safe place to start again. His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. As weeks passed, their routine settled naturally. Mornings began early with feeding animals. Afternoons were for repairs, gardening, or checking fences. Evenings were quieter, often spent on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors. They didn't always talk much, but the silence between them had become comfortable, not awkward. The girl began adding her own touches to the ranch. She planted flowers near the porch. She organized tools more carefully than before. She even convinced the rancher to repaint part of the fence, something he had postponed for years. These small changes slowly transformed the ranch from a place of survival into a place that felt lived in. Occasionally, someone from nearby ranches would stop by, usually to borrow equipment or exchange supplies. At first, the girl stayed inside when visitors came. Old habits of caution were hard to break. But gradually, she began stepping out, offering polite greetings. Most people responded kindly. Some were curious but respectful. They saw her working hard, saw how the rancher trusted her, and accepted her presence without much question. That acceptance meant more to her than she ever expected. One afternoon, a neighbor brought homemade bread as a friendly gesture. The girl accepted it with a shy smile. After the neighbor left, she turned to the rancher. "People aren't always as harsh as I thought," she said. "Some are," he answered honestly. "But many aren't. It just takes time to find the right ones." That simple truth gave her comfort. Her secret, the difficult past she had carried, no longer felt like a shadow following her everywhere. There were still moments when memories surfaced. Sometimes a sound, a smell, or a passing thought would bring back old feelings, but now she didn't face those moments alone. She knew she could talk to the rancher or simply sit quietly until the feeling passed. And the rancher, in his own way, was changing too. Before she arrived, his life had followed a predictable rhythm. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. He had convinced himself that solitude was enough. But now he realized how much he had missed simple companionship, sharing meals, hearing another voice in the house, knowing someone else cared about the same land he did. He found himself smiling more often. Even the animals seemed calmer, as if they sensed the lighter atmosphere. One evening, after finishing chores, they sat on the porch as usual. The sunset was especially beautiful that day, deep orange fading into soft purple. The girl spoke first. "I used to believe I would always be alone," she said. "And now?" he asked. "Now I don't feel that anymore." There was no dramatic emotion in her voice, just quiet certainty, and somehow that made the moment more powerful. Seasons began to shift. The air grew cooler. Leaves changed color. Time passed in a way that felt natural rather than rushed. The ranch thrived. Crops improved. Animals stayed healthy. The repairs they made held strong. Their teamwork showed in every corner of the property. More importantly, trust between them deepened into something steady and dependable. It wasn't rushed or forced. It grew naturally, built on daily kindness, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. Sometimes they laughed about small mistakes, a spilled bucket, a stubborn goat, or tools misplaced. Those moments of lightness reminded both of them how far they had come from the tense early days. The girl began thinking about the future differently. Before, the future had felt uncertain and frightening. Now it felt open, full of possibility rather than fear. She even started helping with decisions about the ranch, where to plant next season, which equipment to repair first, how to manage supplies better. The rancher welcomed her ideas, valuing her perspective. "You're part of this place now," he told her once. "Your voice matters." Another important change was how she saw herself. She no longer defined herself by rejection or past hardship. She began to recognize her own strength, the courage it took to keep moving forward, the resilience she had shown, the kindness she still carried despite everything. One evening, while sorting old photographs in the house, she found a mirror tucked behind a shelf. She paused, looking at her reflection carefully. For the first time in years, she didn't see someone unwanted. She saw someone capable, someone worthy of care and respect. That realization was quiet but powerful. Winter approached slowly. The ranch prepared accordingly, storing feed, reinforcing structures, checking heating equipment. They worked side by side through it all. Cold nights often ended with them sitting near the fireplace. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply enjoyed the warmth and quiet. Those evenings became some of her favorite moments. Eventually, word spread in nearby areas about the rancher and the girl working together successfully. Not in a dramatic way, but enough that people recognized the positive change. A few even mentioned how strong and dedicated she seemed. Hearing those comments once would have made her uncomfortable. Now they simply made her smile softly. Acceptance had replaced fear. One particularly clear evening, months after her arrival,